Hello and welcome back to another FastAPI tutorial. In this tutorial, we go ahead and deploy FastAPI on AWS Lambda. This tutorial has a number of stages. First of all, we'll go ahead and build the most simplistic FastAPI application and then create a few tests for it. We'll then go ahead and start to build up our GitHub actions, build up a CI/CD pipeline. So we go through, test our API, we'll create a deployable zip file, which we can then go ahead and deploy to AWS Lambda. So we will go ahead and utilize AWS S3 to upload the API zip file and then deploy it then over to AWS Lambda. And then just to finish off, we'll set up a very simple configuration in AWS Gateway so we can then access our API. So by the end of this tutorial, we'll have a pipeline for deploying our application, our FastAPI over to Lambda. We've set up our AWS S3 storage and AWS Gateway so that we can then access our API. I will make the assumption that there may be some viewers who are completely new to maybe development. So we'll just go ahead and go through utilizing GitHub desktop here, creating a new GitHub repository. If you are familiar with GitHub, just go ahead, build a new repository, get that open in Visual Studio Code or whatever your code editor you're using, and be ready in the next part of this tutorial. So go ahead and skip. If you are completely new, you do need some instruction on how to create a new repository. Like I said here, I'm going to be utilizing GitHub desktop just to make it the process easier if you are a beginner. So I've gone ahead and created a new folder on my desktop, for example, wherever you want to work. Let's just create a new repository. So I just call this FastAPI AWS. And then go ahead and just select where you want to save this. So I've created this new folder on my desktop called FastAWS and then create a new repository. So let's go ahead and publish the repository. Private or not private is completely up to you. So let's publish this repository. So now we can actually go ahead and view it on GitHub. So now we built our new repository. Let's go ahead now and we can open this up in Visual Studio Code. Okay, so let's get building a very simplistic FastAPI API. Let's create a new folder. Let's make a new folder called API. So if you are interested in any other FastAPI tutorials, there are a few now on the channel. This is part of a series. I think this is part 5. Okay, so I've made a new folder here called API. I'm going to make a new file here called main. So this is where we're going to build our API. Okay, so let's just go ahead and create a virtual environment in this folder. So I'm using Windows, so I use the M flag and create a new virtual environment in a folder called VEMV. Okay, so that should start a new folder here. It might take a couple of seconds on yours. So we create a new virtual environment. Let's just go inside of there and let's go ahead and just activate that. So now we're working inside of our virtual environment. So now we can go ahead and pip install. Let's go ahead and pip install FastAPI. So we're just installing FastAPI. Now I will have a file here called commands. All the commands here, pretty much everything you need. So you can see next up we're going to need to install our server, UVcorn. So let's just go ahead and do that. So hopefully that just makes it easier for you. Okay, so that now, we've now installed our server. So we can now go back to our main file. Let's get rid of that. So now go back to our main file. So let's just go ahead and build up our API. So I realize that it is a bit annoying for some people when I just bring code in line by line. It just makes it a little bit quicker. And of course you can always pause and it allows me to just make any commentary on the code. I'm not very good at writing and talking at the same time. So let's go ahead and just import FastAPI. Like I said, I do have other tutorials where we go through in more depth creating FastAPI applications. So here we're just going to create really something basic. So we're going to bring in FastAPI, and then we're going to just set up a root directory path here. So this is what's going to happen when we go to our root directory of our API. We'll create a new function here called root, and we're just going to return message hello world. Okay, so when we go to our root directory of our API, this is what's going to be returned. Okay, so if you head back in the commands here, what we're going to need to do now is just start the server. So this is actually incorrect. We need to go into the folder API and then find main. So main being the file. And then you can see inside of this file, there's app. Okay, FastAPI app. So we're just going to start our implementation of FastAPI. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. And you can now see that the FastAPI is working, and it should be on port 8000. Yep. Okay, so let's just go ahead and test this. So here we go. So open up a new browser, 127.0.0.1, loopback address, port 8000. You can see we're returning the message hello world. So that we can just set up some tests here in the GitHub Actions, let's just go ahead and make a new folder called tests. And inside of here, let's go ahead and create a new file called tests, or tests, testcore.py, for example. So we just build up a few tests so that we can test our application. And like I said, we can just then implement that within our GitHub Actions. Right, so let's go ahead and bring in test client from FastAPI test client, and then we're gonna need our application as well, and then we go ahead and set that all up so that we can then create a new function here. Let's go ahead and actually send a GET request to the root directory of our API. Of course, we know what it should return. It should be a JSON response. So we're just going to then essentially get that response and then have a look at the status code. Now, if you're not familiar with status codes or HTTP response codes, if we do navigate to our home page and we do receive the information, HTTP is going to send a 200 response, just referring to the fact that that page has been returned successfully, for example. So if this link wasn't working, we return a different code. So we'll go ahead and also just return the response. So we should receive a message from our API, message hello world. And obviously that just matches up here, the return. Right, so that's just going to test out that. So now we can go ahead, and if you have a look in the commands here, we're going to need to install PyTest. So we're just going to close the server, Control-C, and let's just pip install PyTest. Okay, so that's going to give us the tools to just type in PyTest, and that should then find our tests and then run our tests. So this probably won't work. Nope. Okay, so let's go into tests here. Let's create a new file. We're going to need probably an init file here, so it becomes discoverable. So let's give that a go again. So run PyTest again. This time it's not working. I could have just read that. So it says no module name request. So we just need to install pip install requests. Okay. So now let's go ahead and run PyTest again. And there we go. So one test has been run, referred to as dot here, and it's all passed. Everything is okay. Okay, so let's just finish up by going ahead and pip freezing. Okay, so it just freeze. We're creating requirements text file. So these are all the requirements, all the packages that are going to be needed in order to run our application. So we're going to need to utilize this. Obviously, this is also going to be needed once we deploy this to AWS Lambda. So I do apologize if I've rushed through that, or you think I've rushed through those stages there and didn't give you enough information. By all means, head back to some of the other tutorials on FastAPI, where we go into a little bit more detail on building APIs with FastAPI. But hopefully that was enough for us to kind of understand what's going on so far. So we can now move to the next stage, building our GitHub pipeline. So what we're trying to do now then is essentially build instructions so that we can go ahead and just test to make sure whatever we try to push over to our repository, our GitHub repository, is working through the fact we've created some tests here, testing our application. Then we're going to go ahead and build a zip file. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to package everything up so that we can then use that package, that compressed file, to deploy that to AWS Lambda. So let's go ahead and create a new folder here. We're going to create a .github, and that's going to be our first folder. So inside of here, we're going to create a new folder called workflows. Okay, and then inside of here, we'll create a new file. Let's call that main. It's going to be a YAML file. There we go. So I do apologize for those who are experienced utilizing GitHub Actions. For those who have not used GitHub Actions before, here we have in GitHub Actions, and you can see here we can set out a set of instructions to perform certain actions. So like I've alluded to, what we're going to do here is we're going to set up some actions so that we can test the application when we push our code over to our repository. So the actions are going to be automatically started when we push our code over to our repository. Like I said, we're going to create some actions so that we can test the application to make sure it's okay. If it does test okay, that means we can go ahead and build a zip file. And then eventually we'll go ahead and then deploy that zip file over to AWS Lambda. Before we go ahead and build this, you can go ahead and have a look at the code repository. There's a link in the description of the video where all the code is, so you can go ahead and have a look at the code. But let me just take you through a walkthrough of this code here in the workflows main file. So first of all, we provide a name, so FastAPI CI/CD, and that can be whatever you like. So first we want to trigger the workflow on push. So basically what's going to happen here is that whenever we push over our repository, the following actions are going to take place. So behind the scenes, what's happening, if I had to paint the picture for new developers, this code is going to be run on a virtual machine, say. So we need to kind of specify what machine we want to run our code on. So let's go ahead now and specify Ubuntu latest. So this runs on Ubuntu latest, and then we want to copy across, if you like, all of our code or make available our repository to our virtual machine where we're going to run the virtual environment and set up our code and test our application and so forth. So we run the actions checkout too. So go ahead and just copy and paste that into Google if you want to learn a little bit more about that. That will take you over to the repository where you can read through the manual. And then we want to set up Python. So let's go ahead now and use action setup Python v2. Again, if you copy that into Google, that will give you more information about what it does and all the different parameters you can include. But here we're going to specify version 3.7 version of Python. So we're going to use Python 3.7. So there are some optionals here, architecture, so we can specify so do a 64-bit. So if we don't specify, the default is 64. So that isn't a problem. And then that's basically setting up the environment for us to now go ahead and install virtual environment. So let's go ahead and do that. So pip3 install virtual env. So there we go ahead and just make that resource available so we can set up a virtual machine on our runner here. So let's go ahead and set up a virtual environment. So virtual VMV. Now we are going to be utilizing caching here, or caching, or cache. So in your actions, there may be some actions that are repeated. So it would be a good idea potentially to cache that information, potentially. So go ahead and have a look at the cache guide or caching guide, and that will help essentially just speed up this process, particularly if you've got kind of a long-winded action that is just repeated every time you perform this action, or every time in this case we perform the push over to main. So what we're going to do is we're going to just cache the virtual env. So we basically select actions cache, and then we then select an ID so we can refer to it maybe later, and then we just define what we want to cache or cache. And then from there, we then select the requirements text. So essentially what's happening here is we're just making sure that we're caching the VENV folder, so that if we perform this action again and we're using the same dependencies, well, then they're kind of already installed, we're already up and running. So we can skip that process or speed up that process. So let's move on to the next step, which will be to activate the virtual ENV. So if it hasn't already been activated, we go ahead and activate as per normal, and then just pip install the requirements text. So if that doesn't make sense, earlier we made a requirement text here. So these are all the packages that are going to be needed in order to get our FastAPI application running. So what we're doing here is we're just basically just installing them so that we can go and actually run this and test our application. So we'll go ahead and install that. So if this is running, if I'm going a little bit quick here, just make sure the indentation is really important. It's worth noting there. If you've not used or set up a GitHub Actions file before, that's definitely worth noting. Like I said, there is the code in the link in the description of this video, so you can go ahead and have a look at the repo of this, and you can maybe just copy this out. So yeah, but we've gone ahead and now we've set up a virtual environment. So now we can go ahead and run our tests. So you'll notice that we need to activate virtual ENV again because GitHub doesn't preserve the environments. So we go ahead and do exactly that, and we run PyTest. Right, now remember we've installed these dependencies, so PyTest is available. So next up, we then create an archive of our dependencies. So when we deploy this to AWS Lambda, we're going to need the dependencies that are connected to our application that's needed to run our application. So we're going to package those up nicely in a zip file. So we go ahead and on the server at least go into Python 3.7 and site packages. So that's where they all reside. And then we're just going to copy that over to a new zip file called API zip. And then next up, we're then going to add the main file into our zip. So we go to and change the directory to ./API. And then we just add what's inside of there to our zip folder. And next up, we need to then make this zip folder available. So we can do that by utilizing the actions upload artifact v2. So that's going to make our artifact available so that when we complete this file, we'll then be able to upload that to Amazon AWS 3, and then we utilize it from there, the API folder or the API zip folder. We'll take it from AWS A3 and we put it into or deploy it into AWS Lambda. Right. So next up then, we just basically select the name and the path, and then that will then be available for us to work with. So that's pretty much it for at this point. So let's go ahead and test this. So we'll just go into FastAPI. Just make sure that you just make a new commit. It looks like I've already committed it. So let's just go ahead and just remove this, for example. So I can make a new commit. So once you go and head back into your repository, head over to Actions, you should now see the workflow being processed. You can see now this has been completed. If you do get a red X, it's probably just some sort of typo or indentation error. So we can now go inside of here. You can see that this is all that's happened here. So we set it up, we run checkout, we set up Python, installed VMV, created dependencies, add the API, uploaded it, and so on. So it does look like everything's been completed. So if we go back into the actions, so I was in the right place in the first point. And then down here, you can now see the artifact that we've created, our zip file called API. So let's go ahead and just download that and take a look what's inside. Okay, so just open this up. You can see that inside of here we have all of our dependencies, as well as at the bottom here we've got our main file. That's the API that we developed. And that's pretty much it. That's everything we have here that we're going to need in order to get our API working. This is what's going to be deployed on AWS Lambda. So now we're ready to move across to AWS. So if you haven't already got an AWS account, then just quickly create a new AWS account. And then we can go ahead and build a new S3 bucket and then configure AWS Lambda. So once you've logged in or signed up, go ahead to the AWS Management Console. From here, we can access the services. You can see that I've recently accessed S3, but down here in storage, we've got S3. So go ahead and start that. Right, so we're going to just create a simple bucket. So let's go ahead and do exactly that. So create a new bucket. Let's give this a name of FastAPI. That should be okay. And then select your region. So this is important that you remember that you just jot down what your region is, because we're going to need that shortly. So here I'm just going to use EU West 2. You can see there's loads available wherever you might be. So we'll do that. That's pretty much all that we're going to need there. So let's go ahead and create a new bucket. Already exists, so FastAPI. We'll do something like that. Oh, that'll be why. Okay, let's create a new bucket. Okay, so that's our bucket created. So that's pretty much all we need to do here in Amazon S3. So now let's just go ahead and let's go into a Lambda. So it's up here in Compute here, Lambda. So let's go ahead now and create a new Lambda function. So let's create a new Lambda function. Let's start from scratch. Let's give this a function name, FastAPI. That seems to be okay. Let's just choose a runtime. So that's going to be Python. I think we're using 3.7. If you remember, that's what we selected. We could use 3.8, so we could set our actions up in GitHub, in actual fact, for 3.8 as well. In actual fact, we probably could just use 3.8 here, but we'll just go for 3.7 in this instance. That's pretty much all we're going to do at this point here in Lambda. So let's just create this function. That's probably going to take a few seconds to complete. So once that's completed, there is a little configuration that we're going to need to make. Right, so in order for our FastAPI app to work, we're going to need to kind of wrap this up with an app called Mangum. So this is going to act as an adapter, if you like. So it can handle the API Gateway requests to our Lambda function. So that's basically just going to be wrapped around our application, if you like, and it's just going to be able to kind of help manage the requests from our API Gateway so that we can take requests. So let's go into the Lambda runtime settings. Okay, let's go to edit. And then from here, because we're using Mangum under the settings here, we just need to change this here to main handler. Okay, so now we can just press save. So main handler, that's going to make a little bit more sense in a second. So let's go back to our code here. Right, so let's go back to our main. So what we're going to need to do here is we're just going to need to pip install Mangum. So again, if you're not too sure, the commands should be here, but they're not. So let's just write this in. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and install that. Okay, and let's now go back into our main file here. What we're going to need to do is just bring this in. So from Mangum, let's just import Mangum. Okay, and then we're now going to need to set up our handler. So if you remember, we had main.handler. So main was referring to this file, and then handler was referring to this here. So handler equals Mangum. and then app equals app. There we go. So that's pretty much it implemented now. And hopefully you can see how that Lambda function is now kind of connected to handler here. And then Magnum is then going to work from there. You might agree this is a very simple setup once you've done it a few times and it's working. There isn't really too much we need to do to get this started. So now AWS S3 and Lambda is now configured. We're now going to head back to our GitHub Actions, and we're going to then create our pipeline so that we can actually then deploy this over to Lambda. So it's worth noting, if you prefer not to have this pipeline, this can all be done manually utilizing the command line. So by all means, go ahead and just type in like AWS command prompt or command line interface, and download that, and then you can use the AWS command line interface. So I think I might have it installed. Nope. Okay, I don't think I've got it installed. So yeah, you can go ahead and utilize that to deploy, but we're going to just move this pipeline on a little bit further, this script a little bit further, and we're now going to go ahead and deploy our API zip over to our AWS Lambda. So in order for us to do that, we're going to need to utilize our API keys. We're going to need some keys here to be able to access these resources from GitHub. So if you go into your name here and go into my security credentials, that's going to take you to a page here where we can then access our access keys. Okay, so let me just deactivate this one and delete this one. So what we're going to need to do here is create a new set of keys. Let me just delete that. So let's create a new set of keys so we can then show those access keys. So we're going to need those keys to go back now into GitHub. So make sure you're in your right repository. Go to settings here. And then from here, you're going to need to go down to the secrets. And we're going to need to set up some secrets for this repository. So let's set up a new repository secret. So we're going to call this AWS secret. Secret access key. Okay, so just put in your secret access key right here from AWS. So that's the AWS secret access key. And then in addition to that, we're going to also need the AWS secret access key ID. So those are the two items that you were given here when we went here. So when you show these access keys, you'll be able to see these two items. So let's just set that up. So ID. Okay, and then you can update this anytime you like. Obviously just typed in something random there. And then the last one, let's just also do AWS default region. So if you remember, I said to you when we set up the bucket, just remember that what region we're using. And so if you go back, if you're not too sure, let's just go back to AWS S3. It's up here in actual fact in the URL. So EU West 2, that's what I was using. So I'll just put that in now. Okay, so that's the AWS default region. Okay, so we're going to use these secrets. Obviously, the idea here is that no one can access these, but our action script will need it in order to upload to AWS S3 and also then to deploy to Lambda. Okay, so here we are then back in our main YAML file, just below where we finished off the implementation of testing and building our zip file. Let's now go ahead and deploy this. So let's run on Ubuntu latest. We're just going to double check to make sure that we're running on main, and then we've got the push to our repository. So let's go ahead now and install AWS CLI. So like I said previously, we could just download AWS CLI and just run these commands directly from the command line if you prefer, if you didn't want to make this pipeline. So we're going to use the install AWS CLI. So we're going to need to just utilize our secrets now. So we should have set up our secrets. So just make sure that these names are what your secret names have been defined as. Otherwise, obviously, that won't work. So the ID, the access key, and region. So that's essentially then going to set up our AWS CLI. So at this point, we are kind of then logged in as us. So let's go ahead now and just download the Lambda API zip. So download the API zip that we created. So we're going to need to access that through the artifact. So we'll just go ahead and access that. And now we're going to upload it to S3. So here we've used the command AWS S3, and we're going to basically copy over API zip to our bucket. So you just need to make sure that bucket name is the same as your bucket name. Okay. So that's the bucket name. And then we want to just place that into a folder, the root directory api.zip. Okay, so that's basically just going to copy over from the artifact API zip and then upload it to S3. Okay, so we're going to need our secret access key and region again to do that. And now we can go ahead and deploy it to Lambda. Right, so AWS Lambda, let's update this. Now the function name was called FastAPI. So our Lambda function was called FastAPI, if I remember. Okay, so it's FastAPI, so that's our function, Lambda function. And you can see now we're going to access our S3 bucket. So just make sure the bucket name is correct. And we're just going to utilize the API zip. There we go. So that's going to then update our Lambda function with that code. Right, so once that's done, obviously here we're going to need our access key again. Once that's done, we're then complete. So that's pretty much the whole process at this point. Again, if you just need to access this code, I know it's a little bit long here. By all means, go ahead and look in the repository, have a look, see what we've done here. But that's pretty much an overview of the code, what's happening. At this point, everything should have been copied across. So now we can just upload this, or we can just push this over to our repository. And hopefully at this point, we'll have a working action, which will copy everything across over to AWS Lambda. So I'll go ahead and just copy this across, push this over. So at this point, you can see that when you go into the job that's running here, you can see we've made this pipeline, if you like, and that was connected through the facts up here. I've utilized needs. So that's essentially built kind of a connection here between the CI and CD. So I did have an error, and what's useful here is that we can now drill down. So in actions, you can see that we had this error. So it allows me just to kind of drill down here, and I can see that because I've named this workflow, I can see where the problem has occurred. In this case, it's running tests. So notice here it says, for example, no module named Mangum. Okay, so let's go back into our code. The problem we had here is that we didn't copy it across to our requirements. I don't think we did that. So you just need to run the pip freeze. So that should copy things across and update the requirements. So now you can see we've got Mangum here. So let's just go ahead again and let's just update this. So if you push back over and then go back into your actions, you can see that a new workflow is running. So we'll give that a couple of seconds and see how we get on. So this time it has passed and we're now into CD. So it looks like we're now setting up the job and installing AWS CLI. So you can see the steps based upon the names that we provided in our code. Okay, so first time, probably second time, lucky. Everything has worked okay and we have a completed job. Now, the likelihood is some of you won't have there'll be an error, and it's just going to be a few problems that you need to check. So you just need to make sure that you've set up your secret keys correctly. So just make sure you've got your secrets correct. and make sure you got your secret names correct and they correspond over to your code. That's an error. And then there may be some sort of typo here. So just use a repository in the link in the video description. Just double check the code if you have tried to type it as I've been talking. So if I head back over to AWS Lambda, you can now see if I refresh, it was last modified a minute ago. So the code size is 16.5 meg, which is the same size as the package type zip, which was the same size as the zip we created. So it looks like everything's been updated and we're now ready to move to the next step. So the final step in this process, then, let's set up the AWS Gateway. So let's point that to our Lambda function, and then we can go ahead and test and actually then run our API. So let's head over to API Gateway. Let's just type it in here. Bring up the service, API Gateway. Right, so this is our API Gateway. So the whole point here is that we build an API Gateway. We then define what requests can then be sent across to, for example, we connect it to our Lambda function, for example. So let's just do that first, in actual fact. So let's create a new API. This is going to be a REST API. So let's go ahead and build this. So REST, new API, API name, let's just call this FastAPI. Description if you like, endpoint name regional, and then let's create an API. Right, so that's our API gateway now set up. So this is a gateway. So we need to determine what we send across or what goes through our gateway and where it lands up. So here's the root directory of our gateway. So let's add a method. Okay, so what we're going to say now is that anyone who points to our root here and uses any of these, so let's just go for any. Maybe we just want get. So we only allow get requests or post requests from this particular resource here. So this is a root directory here. So let's just go for any. Oh, let's go for get. So we're only going to allow get to the root here. Yep. And then we're going to integrate, or we're going to connect this to our Lambda function. Let's select a Lambda proxy integration. And then we're going to select our FastAPI. So that's our Lambda function name. So we're basically just connecting this up. So root get requests are going to be connected to our FastAPI Lambda function. Let's press save and OK. So once that's done, we can now click here test to make sure that's working OK. Let's test this out. And you can see here we get returned, or what is returned here is the message hello world from our API. So everything looks good. So at this point, we now want to potentially make this available to everyone. So let's go into actions. Let's go into actions here and deploy our API. So let's just deploy this to a new stage. A stage name is going to be called dev. And let's just deploy this. So from here, we're given the URL. So we can now use this URL here. I'll just open up Postman, for example. Just get rid of this. So we can now test this. So let's just type in our URL and let's press, make sure it's a GET request. Let's press send. And there we go. Now our API is working in the cloud and anyone can access it through this link. So if we tried post, for example, you see that we get missing authentication token. Obviously, we can't utilize that request because we've not set that up, but GET works absolutely fine. And there we have our simple deployment of our FastAPI app over to AWS Lambda, obviously utilizing our API gateway as well. So hopefully that gave you some insight into how to start deploying your FastAPI API over to AWS Lambda. Hopefully this is a good start. Hopefully this was useful, and I do hope that I see you in the next tutorial.